Finally, we're going to answer the question you've all been asking. Why does Decoded hate white people? Well, we don't.
I hate to break it to you, Francesca, but actions speak louder than words. When 100% of your content is focused on proving that all white people have privilege and racial bias, as well as attempts to debunk facts that white people were ever oppressed or disadvantaged on an equal level to black people throughout history, then it really doesn't mean jack shit when you say you don't hate white people.
There's overwhelming evidence that implicit racial bias is real, and institutional racism is still rampant in America and abroad today. Whoa, okay, talking about oppression doesn't mean I hate white people.
No, talking about how white people have no idea what it's like to be oppressed is pretty strong evidence that you hate white people.
The problem is it's hard to get mad at systems and institutions instead of taking these conversations personally. When I criticize the school-to-prison pipeline, lack of police training, workplace discrimination, or our court system, some people don't want to hear it or think about it.
No, they don't want to be labeled as racist. Maybe if you would learn to stop calling them racist at the start of every conversation, they would be more willing to listen to what you have to fucking say.
Let's use preschool, for example. In a study done by the Department of Education, black children make up 18% of the preschool population, but represent almost half of all out-of-school suspensions. Basically, while a misbehaving white toddler might get time out, a black toddler is more likely to get sent home and have disciplinary action on their record.
Maybe it has something to do with the fact that so many black kids are born into single-parent houses and that they aren't disciplined well enough by their parents. Are you also forgetting that there are preschool teachers who are not white? Maybe it's because black children a lot of the time behave 1,000 times worse than white children.
What does that say to you? For journalists who investigate these kinds of stats, they reach the conclusion that these suspensions are tied to teacher bias. In other words, teachers are more likely to see black children as threats to their classroom rather than just kids being kids.
You don't hate white people, and yet you use a white teacher as a scapegoat for this claim. Makes perfect fucking sense. Also, neither of the sources she gives makes a mention of racial bias of any kind. And on top of that, one of them even says that Asian people have the lowest disciplinary stats of any ethnic group of children, even more so than white kids.
And always remember, all toddlers are monsters. This is a huge problem. Does it mean that all of these preschool teachers are racist? Not explicitly so.
So you don't actually hate all white people, but you do think that all white preschool teachers are racist. Those are some fucked up standards you have.
But they have bias, just like all of us. And fixing this is even more complicated, including allocating tons of money towards teacher training, childcare resources, and a million other things. So let's check in with your feelings. Are you A, mad at the Department of Education for not training teachers better? B, mad at your state congressional representatives for not pushing for bigger education budgets? Or C, mad at me for talking about this because it's easier to direct your anger towards someone making you feel guilty instead of being angry at the complicated as world of institutional racism?
Yes, we are all pretty fucking angry at you. Not just because you go out of your way to make people feel guilty, but because you lie and peddle false information like it's going out of goddamn style.
If you chose C, please resist the urge to close your browser and instead keep listening. You might have noticed, nowhere in there did I say white people are the problem.
Again, just because you deny it does not mean that you do not believe it.
That's because these issues are bigger than individuals. It's going to take all of us to advocate for change. So, the next time you have the urge to say, Francesca hates white people, please autocorrect to, Francesca hates the historical roots of oppression that have led to today's societal conditions which allow institutions with white leadership to systemically discriminate against people of color. Easy peasy.
I bet you hate Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy as well. They're just as fictitious as the institutional racism that you talk about.
It's clear that people who get mad about discussions of racism aren't actually listening to the criticisms. They aren't hearing the facts and stats. They aren't even directly disagreeing with research. Instead, they're disagreeing with the sentiment, things are bad for people of color and we need change.
Oh my fucking god! It's because they don't like to be called racist! Why is that so hard for you to understand? If you want to convince people of something, attacking their character is not the way to do it.
Why? Well, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, a white critical racial and social justice scholar, has described the discomfort some white people have towards talking about racism as white fragility. Since white people often grow up in environments where discussing race is seen as taboo, some react defensively when the topic of racism comes up. Dr. DiAngelo says this manifests itself as outward displays of emotions, such as anger, fear, and guilt.
People are taught not to like discussing the issue of race because race is a very taboo thing to discuss. The reason why it is a taboo thing to discuss is due to all the horrible things humans have done to each other throughout history because of their race. That is why it has become progressive to completely ignore the idea of race. Whenever race is brought up, it opens an entire Pandora's box of negative emotions, memories, and bad historical connotations, especially for people whose ancestors played a part in historical racism who are trying to be decent people in the modern age. This has become a social norm to try to reconcile with all the various ethnic groups who have suffered throughout history as a result of racism. The colorblind philosophy that people like you despise so much was implemented to placate and appease all the so-called people of color that you say you fight for. And yet you are the one who opposes these things and fights against them. And somehow we are the ones who are racist. At one point, Francesca, your hypocrisy amused me. But now, it sickens me.
I'd also add aggressively clogging someone's @replies on Twitter to that list, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh, you're one to fucking talk, since to you, blocking replies on Twitter is not the same as quashing freedom of speech.
It's also hard to think about these issues on an institutional level, and because talking about racism automatically makes a lot of white people uncomfortable.
Every time she says this, I want to jump into my computer and rip her spine out. I don't know how many more goddamn times I have to say this. If so many social justice warriors didn't call white people racist, then more white people would probably listen to what they have to say.
They sometimes begin to think they're being personally attacked or blamed.
Yes! Being labeled a racist is being personally attacked and blamed!
Recent studies show that white Americans believe bias against white people is a bigger issue in our country than ever before. This, however, is simply not true. Statistically, from mortgage lending to police brutality, the reality for white Americans tends to be way more positive than for black Americans and other people of color. So don't be mad at me, be mad at the stats.
Where is the affirmative action for white people? Where is the movement dedicated to getting revenge on the police for them killing white people? Where is the month dedicated to white history? Where is the concrete proof for any of these claims? You say you don't hate white people, but right now, you are giving other people excuses to hate and disparage white people.
A classic example is the bias associated with drug use. White people use drugs at similar rates as black people, but black people are much more likely to go to jail for drug usage because of the way we structure our policing practices.
I'm going to tell you exactly why that is the case. According to the Washington Post article you provided to back up this claim, black drug users sell and use drugs out in the public, whereas white drug users and dealers do a majority of their business indoors. In other words, when you sell and use drugs outdoors, that makes it a lot easier to be found and arrested by the police. The same cannot be said for doing the deed indoors. So essentially, black people are not jailed more than white people for drug-related crimes because of racism, but because they don't know how to be subtle and inconspicuous.
But when these issues are brought up, too often people accuse us of bias against white people.
That's because you ignore criticisms and dissections of your arguments and evidence to consolidate your narrative that white people are the devil.
By refusing to engage with the actual issues, the people who shout the absurd accusation, "You're racist against white people," are really just attempting to shut down the conversation.
You are the one who is prohibiting conversations. You are ignoring well thought out and detailed deconstructions of all your ideas and history, because if you didn't, you would have to relinquish your profitable disdain for white people.
Imagine if we were able to talk about these issues without a mob of angry replies.
Well, when you do nothing but criticize white people in every single video you do, it shouldn't be surprising that most of the feedback you get is negative. You reap what you sow, bitch!
Or what if people were angry at oppression instead of the people talking about oppression?
Except you're not telling people to be angry at oppression. You're telling them to be angry at the people responsible for it. Your belief is that every white person, no matter who they are, is a contributing factor to the oppression of black people. You are a motherfucking sociopath. These videos, and videos like them, are fucking poison. They have done nothing good. All you have done is terrorize and galvanize black people into taking vengeful action against the police and the white population of the country. You are creating racist, supremacist propaganda, and you have completely transformed into the white plantation owners, slave owners, and Jim Crow bureaucrats you say you despise so vehemently.
And look, no matter who you are, these conversations can be difficult. Acknowledging your privilege is difficult, and accepting that the world isn't fair to everyone sucks. But the most important things are often the hardest ones to do. Thanks so much for watching. We don't hate anybody. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.
Go fuck yourself, you loathsome slag. I have seriously had enough of you and your mendacious piece of shit videos. You are condescending and smug beyond belief. Your research is consistently laughable. And yes, you do hate white people. This video, more than any others, makes that very clear. Goodbye, my friends, and hunt well.